He's okay, or just
He's okay, yeah. He regrets not being here. He just wasn't feeling well.
not me?
It's not you.
It's definitely not. He was
really-
there for this. Yeah, I can tell you.
Oh.
As a migraine.
Where if you just go on, first off, using the national poll is ridiculous. It has nothing to do with the ability of a candidate to win an election that's 7 months from now. Because it's not a national election; it's a state-by-state election, as you all know. And so, using a national poll is arbitrary. I mean, it's completely arbitrary, but it's arbitrary within the control of the people who are setting it. Are not going to be included in quote the first tier based on an arbitrary, really irrelevant benchmark. And as bad as that is, the fact that they're going to be parsing between clearly less than 1% difference between someone who's going to get in and someone who's not going to get in, and from it is when the margin of error in these polls is 5 or 6%. Again, it makes it even more specious as what their approach. So I have from the very beginning, from the first day, even though I didn't know they were going to do this, suggested they need to have everybody in the debate who would have qualified under past debate criteria in years past, which is some 1% threshold. I've always thought the 1% threshold should be a blend of polls between New Hampshire and Iowa. And if you're at 1% blended between those two states, you're in. And if there's 16 candidates, then do 2 debates, back them up back to back. Some people have suggested random draw. I think that's, to a Republican electorate who already doesn't trust the establishment, of which I am one. I think if you're going to do Iowa, New Hampshire blended poll, then take the odd numbered versus and put them in one group, and the even numbers and put them in other. In other words, first, third, fifth, seventh, ninth, etc. would be in one group. Second, fourth, sixth would be in another. So you get a blend of the top and the bottom, if that's what if the media is concerned about that. And then the next time around, CNN, you mix it up. You do a different mix. I don't know why the powers that be don't want all these candidates to have an opportunity to be heard. I don't understand it. I mean, it's actually a twist that might actually draw voters, as opposed to a controversy that could turn voters off.
So thinking of all the different candidates and the competition for attention and media coverage and that sort of thing, just really quickly, I think this would be useful for the voters. What does candidate Santorum offer that all of these 200 other candidates don't? Why should someone who's in the Republican Party or an independent trying to make that decision among all these different people pick you?
Long list, actually. So let me sort of walk down through them.
Top reasons.
Oh, it's hard to say a top reason. I would say the top reason is for Republicans. I'd say probably their top goal for most Republicans is to win. And so I would make the argument that I've got the best chance of winning the general election. And the reason I say that is there's nobody in this race who has won an election in a presidential election turnout year. And in the states that we need to win. And you have all these governors who are very well accomplished, some of them from tough states, but they run in gubernatorial turnout elections, which, as we all know, is a much more favorable field for Republicans to win in. And we've had several of these candidates barely win under those in these states. I was able to win, yes, in gubernatorial turnout elections, but also in a presidential turnout election in 2000, which, as you know, was not the greatest presidential year for Republicans. In a state like Pennsylvania, where President Bush lost by 4 and I won by 5. I was the only conservative in that entire cycle that won a state that Bush lost. And the reason I did it is really the same set of issues that I'm bringing to the table now, and that is that I was able to appeal and continue to appeal to the voters that we need if we're going to win states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa. And those are, if you look at the Real Clear Politics, Sean Trendy's done a lot of work on this as to who didn't vote in the 2012 election. It's the voters that I'm talking, it's the voters who will tune in and see Rick Santorum going from factory floor to factory floor as I travel around this country, talking about creating jobs in manufacturing and energy, construction, vocational education, focusing on what we can do to help reknit and restore the American family and strengthen the family as a family unit, protect our trade laws, increase the minimum wage. I don't know if you saw this poll the other day that, 52% of Republicans believe in a minimum wage higher than $10 an hour. 52% of Republicans. A much higher percentage believe in at least some increase in the minimum wage. And 82% of Americans do, yet every Republican candidate is against it, except me. Now, I'm not even for a $10 increase. I'm for to getting to $8.75. But the point is, we have ideas that actually connect with who votes for us now and who will vote for, who's open to voting for us. And it's not wealthy suburbanites. It's not the urban elite. It is small town, rural, and conservative voters who live in blue collar towns all throughout America, heavily concentrated through the manufacturing belt of this country, and they didn't come out to vote last time. They couldn't vote for Obama because he's been a failure, and they wouldn't vote for Romney. And those who did come out to vote overwhelmingly voted for Obama because, and you saw this in the exit polls, they asked the question, what's the most important issue in this campaign? And 23% of the electorate in the exit polls said, does he care about people like me? And I guarantee you that's those voters, because you look at the income profile, it's exactly those voters. And 81% voted for Obama. You level that out, and you bring out a whole bunch of other voters who now see that there's something that can be done. You've got an opportunity to change the electoral map. And I really believe we're chasing our tail on trying to stay within the same group of states that we always try to compete with and try to thread the needle to get just to 270. If we don't start to put some other states in play as demographics change, states in play that we can and should win, and that includes New Hampshire, by the way. If we can't put some of those states in play, then we're ultimately going to be a minority party and have an almost impossible time winning the presidency. And I think that's what Reagan did in 1980. He put a whole bunch of states in play that we really never thought we could have in play, and I think we can do that again. So if you wanted to give one reason that sort of blends everything together, it's the positions, it's how I come from that area. I've won votes and have proven success in that area, and we're running a campaign that's really focused on that with real ideas and policies that can support it. And part of that, by the way, is immigration, is the policy on immigration. So it's not just our economic policy, it's not just our trade policy, it's not just what we're going to talk about on regulations or minimum wage or a whole host of other issues that are economic policy related, but it's also talking to these workers and saying, here's a guy that's got a whole economic policy focused around creating an opportunity for the 74% of Americans who don't have a college degree to be able to rise in society again and live the American dream. And consistent with that is an immigration policy that says we're going to quit flooding this country with low-skilled workers to hold wages down for the very workers who are hurting the most in America. And what the interesting thing is, I don't know if you followed what I've been talking about or how much I've been talking about immigration, but I've talked about it in almost all my speeches. I talk about it on everything from MSNBC to CNN, and I do it, as I just did with you, within the context of a broader approach that says we have to be interested in the American worker. And I can tell you, I have not been. No one has called me a racist. No one has called me a xenophobe. No, because I make the point. We've had 35 million people come into this country in the last 20 years. 35 million people come into this country in the last 20 years from overseas, both legally and illegally. That could be a good thing, or that could be a bad thing. But the idea that we can't discuss whether it has been a good thing or a bad thing, that we can't say, well, that's been good for workers or good for the American economy or it's been bad. We can't actually lay out facts that say that since the year 2000, There have been 6.5 million net new jobs created. And what percentage of those net new jobs are held by people who were not born in this country? Answer, all of them. There are 17 million more people who are in the workforce who were born in this country, and they're not working. Now, maybe not those specific people, but overall, there are fewer native-born Americans working today than there was in the year 2000. Now, you can say, well, immigration's had nothing to do with that. I think that'd be a hard case to make, but you can say that. But the fact that I'm saying we need to look at are both how we deal with illegals and allowing them to stay in this country and compete against workers, and the fact that we're bringing 1,050,000 primarily unskilled workers into this country to continue to compete against these workers, is not an issue of xenophobia or anti-Mexican or anything else. It's an issue of what is in the best interest of America and our economy and the workers who are struggling the most. And interestingly enough, so far, now obviously the Democrats haven't gotten into this yet, maybe even other Republicans. So far, we've been able to have a conversation at face value. And if that's the case, Republicans are going to do pretty well.
So you get elected. It's President Santorum's first year in office. What's your top couple of goals? Top three things you want to accomplish in that first 4 years?
First thing we do is disassemble the Iranian deal. That is a ticket to extinction for the state of Israel and a lot of the West. And as you know, Drew, because I've talked about this when I was here last time around, I talked a lot about Iran and have been talking a lot about Iran for many, many years, about Iran with a nuclear weapon being the seminal threat to us as a country and to the world.
So you think it's a really like existential threat?
Existential.
Wipe us out.
Well, look, I asked a former CIA director, what keeps you up at night? This was 8-9 months ago, before all this happened. And he said Iran with a nuclear weapon, deploying it either in a satellite, weather balloon, something like that, and exploding it over the central part of the United States, creating an EMP that knocks out the power grid of the entire country. EMP are pretty scary things. We had an EMP commission that wrote a lot about it. The potential devastation to this country. I mean, as high as 80-90% fatalities within several months, because everything gets knocked out, and the ability to reconstitute is really, really hard because it's so massive. So the answer is, would they do something like that? If you're a rational player on the world stage, no. But if you're a radical theocracy that believes that you're going to bring back your Messiah if you bring about such a calamity, yeah, you might. And I don't see anything from the leadership of this country, from their overt sponsor of terrorism, to the fact, as you all know, Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, where these children were used as minesweepers. They basically put these kids out and walked them through the field so they would blow themselves up to detonate mines. They walked them in a line, so they'd blow themselves up to clear the path for the Iranian army. That's the kind of regime we're dealing with. And for me, there is no greater threat than giving this type of theocracy the ability to bring about such a global calamity. So the answer is, the president has put them on a path to getting that nuclear weapon. He's put them on a path not only to get the nuclear weapon, but to give them the means to protect us from stopping them from getting a nuclear weapon. Everything from giving them, educating them how to stop our viruses or other people's viruses that corrupt their research and computer systems, to allowing the Russians to ship in anti-aircraft and anti-missile technology to defeat any type of military attack on those facilities. So the president is now, if this goes through, will be the largest funder of terrorism in the world, because we will have provided money for the Iranians to do that. We will have ushered in a nuclear age that is the most dangerous in the history of the world, and we will do it for what? For what? To give the president his kudos that he can strike a deal by giving everything away. you almost, you really sort of question, what side are you on when you do a deal like this?
As you know, we have people who are watching on Periscope, and they've been sending in questions.
Yeah.
And while we're on this topic, one of them is wondering, what are your views on Israel?
I think I would say there's no stronger support of Israel in the field. The sanctions that are on Iran right now were codified under a bill that I introduced called the Iran Freedom Support Act. We worked with, because Israel was and is concerns about the existential threat that Iran poses to them. If I'm worried about it in America, imagine how Israel is concerned about it when every day the government of Iran is chanting death to Israel and wiping Israel off the face of the earth. That's why, when I go to Israel, and I have several times over the last few years, they're not worried about Hamas, they're not worried about Hezbollah, they can deal with that. It's not that they're not concerned about it, but the threat to Israel is Iran. And for the president to move forward with this deal in spite of the legitimate concerns of the Israeli people, of all stripes, by the way. I don't know of a single party within Israel that is not opposed to this deal. And for me, if you care about Israel, you got to care about Iran. Second, I'm probably the only person, maybe the only person in the field, who doesn't feel it's the United States' role to tell Israel what the solution to their problem is. I think most of the folks in the field are for a, quote, two-state solution. That's been sort of U.S. policy for a long time. I don't think it should be U.S. policy. I don't think the U.S. should have a policy as telling a sovereign government how to fix their internal problem of dealing with a group of people within their country that are causing them difficulty, any more than I would want the Canadian government to tell us how to deal with some folks who are in southwestern United States who believe that southwestern United States should go back to Mexico. I mean, I don't think if Canadians say, "Oh, we need a two-state solution," I mean, we would look at Canadians and say, "Leave, it's none of your business." And I would say the same thing. It's none of our business. What we should do is we should support the state of Israel. We should support our ally, and have them come to the solution that's best for them, without dictating what that solution is. So I think you'll find on every front, both historically, if you look back, I was involved in the Armed Services Committee and providing them a lot of support for programs that have helped shape their Iron Dome program. We've been a very strong friend of Israel. Why? Because I believe they're a very key ally in a region that's a very dangerous place.
But you had said that when we were talking about President Obama, you said you really sort of questioned what side are you on. Are you questioning his patriotism?
No, I'm saying if you look at the results, I think if you look at the results of the agreement, you have to question it. I'm not saying that, I'm questioning which side Barack Obama's on, but you have to question John Kerry, anybody who was involved in that negotiation. You have to say, if you look at what it does, you have to question which side they're on, not what their intent was.
So your domestic policy, again, getting back to your sort of first year in office, get rid of the Iran deal. What's next?
Well, as I mentioned before, we got to get this economy growing, and we're going to be still hassling with the tax foundation on running. Now, I don't know how many dozens of runs we've done in trying to get this tax proposal I'm working on, but we're getting close to introducing. It'll be, as I said, it's a fair tax. It's a flat tax. It'll be fair. It'll be simple. It will effectively get rid of the IRS as we know it, in the sense that we're going to get rid of a huge amount of the code and make it a much simpler code for the government to implement. One of the reasons I decided to go to a dramatically simpler code is because of because in the past I've been somewhat ambivalent on that. I mean, to me, taxes can and have been used to incentivize certain behavior and discourage other behaviors and things like that. But I've just seen the abuse in the IRS, the continuing abuse of these huge government bureaucracies and the power that they have over people. And I just, not just with the IRS, but with a lot of other government programs, simpler is better, less bureaucratic control is better. And the simpler you make it, and the less discretion you give to the bureaucracy, the more free our country is going to be. And so I've come down to much simpler, flat fare, and apply the same rate of taxation on all forms of income.
A quick Periscope
Corporate
question.
income, yeah.
Does that include capital gains?
Capital gains, dividends, interest, corporate, as well as individual, all will be taxed at the same level. So Warren Buffett's secretary is going to pay the same rate of taxation as Warren Buffett's going to, whether you take your income in capital gains, whether you take it in dividends, whether you take it in ordinary income, you're going to be taxed at the same level.
Won't
Same
that
rate?
necessarily
Same
mean
level?
those?
Same rate. It's a single rate tax.
But wouldn't that necessarily mean that, for some lower income people, that it's gonna be a tax increase?
Yeah, that's what we're working on right now. As I said, it's not a what used to be called the Hall-Rabushka plan, if you remember that from years back, because that would have dramatically increased taxes on lower income people. So we'll have, and that's what we're tweaking. We'll have some provisions in there. Clearly, that will be standard deduction credits, personal income credit, things like that, that will smooth the effect on lower and middle income people. So they're not seeing an increase in taxes. In fact, under the dynamic scoring that I believe in, they'll see a tax reduction.
Where do you put entitlement reform, just dealing with entitlements in general in your list?
I think it's important. I've been very forthright in describing in some detail what I would do on entitlement reform, just as I did 4 years ago, because I think it's important to recognize that, yes, you have to grow the economy. And the most important thing, that's why I always talk about it first, the most important thing we can do is grow the economy to reduce the deficit, because it increases your revenue and it cuts your expenditures. So, and why it cuts expenditures is because means-tested entitlement programs are driven by the lack of growth. But you also have to reform those programs. Everything from what Governor LePage has just done recently, which is to put work requirements on the SNAP program. At least the initial reports I saw, I don't know if I haven't seen anything in the last couple of months, but the initial reports I saw, food stamp rolls were declined by 50%. Is that still accurate, or you don't know? You're not following the thing? Well,
I
it's
don't know the details.
It's a neighboring state, so I thought you might know, but.
They've fallen, but I don't know.
Yeah, at least I saw a number of 50%, and that may not be true. I'm just saying what I read. But what it shows is that these rolls have ballooned over the past 6 years, because the president judges the effectiveness of his economic policies as how many more people that we can put on government programs to help. Obviously, I've measured by how many people get off government programs who don't need the help, and so we're gonna put through what, if you recall back in 1996, when I worked on and authored the Welfare Reform Act of '96. I held to two principles that we did not compromise. I refused to compromise on these two principles in order to be able to transform or change welfare as we know it. And that was a work requirement and a time limit. And we applied that to cash welfare, but we didn't apply it to any of the other means-tested entitlement programs. We didn't apply it to food stamps. We didn't apply it to Medicaid. We didn't apply it to anything else. And we need to, because it was effective. We need to actually re-strengthen it, because Obama has weakened it in some respects. But we need to apply it to all the means-tested entitlement programs and say, in combination with us creating an economy that's going to create more jobs, and particularly jobs for lower skilled workers, to be able to get into the workforce and get good paying jobs and rise. We're going to couple that with a little bit of a boot to say, it's time to get up and start working. We're not going to keep these programs in place for people to be able to choose not to work for one reason or another. And I think that combination, if you can create more jobs, increase wages, then you have, at the same time, you have the ability to say to people, okay, we're going to require work, and we're going to put a time limit on how long you can stay on these programs, because they never were intended to be permanent programs. And that will be one aspect of it. Obviously, Obamacare gone. We'll get rid of it through the reconciliation process and replace it with something that I've been passionate about for a long, long time. Any of you guys have health savings accounts? You do? You're welcome. Because I introduced health savings accounts back in 1992. I was the first one to do it. Now, there's another guy who's going to come here and say the same thing, and he'll be telling you the truth. because his name is John Kasich, and John and I actually introduced the first bill together on health savings accounts. And I worked longer than he did because he left. I worked longer than he did to get a very robust, healthy health savings account law in place. And to me, that is the alternative. The alternative is to put the consumer back engaged and involved in healthcare. Get rid of this government bureaucracy, get rid of the oversight, get rid of the rationing that's going to occur. It's going to start to occur as prices start to go up, as they are dramatically. You're talking about 20 or 30% increases in premiums is what you're hearing this time around. So getting rid of Obamacare, putting control back in the individual, putting a tax code in place. Again, one place the tax code has historically been used and can continue to be used is to subsidize employer-provided insurance and provide a similar benefit for those who don't have employer-provided insurance. That's something Republicans have universally opposed for a long, long time, and I know that because I've universally supported it since the 1990s and have been criticized by some of these conservative groups out there calling me a big government Republican because I want to provide tax support somewhere commensurate with what we provide tax support for those who have employer-provided insurance. And I make the argument that sometimes you cut your nose off to spite your face by the fact that we didn't move forward and provide more access to health insurance through the tax code. We ended up with Obamacare. And the only way we're going to get rid of Obamacare if we provide some support to make sure that everyone has some government support to help with their insurance premiums, just like we do with Medicare, and what we need to do overall with Medicare, which is to go to a premium support model, which I have supported for a couple of decades.
Well, I was just going to ask about Medicare, and it sounds like you think it should exist, but what
the premium support model is really the way to go, which is what I just talked about, which is having the Center for Medicare and Medicare Services oversee, run, and dictate the Medicare and to a large degree the Medicaid program. Again, is a top-down government run. You can say it's not government run, but it is. I mean, it's a federal benefit that is dictated by the government and is overseen by the government. And we have no cost controls other than at the end of the year. Well, I shouldn't say other than. We have no cost controls. We simply pay the bill at the end of the year. If we change that and say, okay, all seniors are going to get X dollars. So we now have a finite benefit that we're going to pay for all seniors, and they're going to get X dollars toward an insurance policy that they can choose from, a variety that are offered by the private sector that obviously have to be in some way certified by the federal government, but stop dictating what those policies are going to look like. Provide broad parameters for the insurance companies to be able to meet.
I'm curious why you think what you think would be the Republican Party's disconnect or problem it has in connecting with voters in presidential election years the last couple of times. Has it been the candidates? Has it been the message? Is there,
Yes.
Yeah. So, how would you address that? Here's how Rick Santorum is going to connect with those.
Well, first,
voters.
I think it's important, I was on Rachel Maddow's show 2 nights ago, if you saw it.
Yeah.
But I mean, she said something that is important as a quality in a candidate. Are you a good communicator? Can you condense things, make sense of things in a way that is upbeat, hopeful, persuasive, and realistic all at the same time? If you can do that, then you can lead. Right? I mean, people can get what you're saying, understand it, connect with it, and be willing to support you and follow that lead. I would make the argument that we have not had particularly effective communicators out there delivering that message.
How much is it the message, though?
Who have a message? So you just perfect question. Who have a message that connects with people on a personal level. I talk about this all the time. I sort of joke about this, but I always say, I know everybody's favorite word. I'll go into a group and I say, I know each of your favorite word. And people look at me and I say, I know your favorite word, I know your favorite word. And they'll say, okay, what is it? I say, what's your name? What's your favorite word? It's everybody's favorite word. Everybody likes to hear their name. The problem with the Republican candidate is that we get up there and we lay out our vision for America, and we talk about cutting taxes or cutting government or growing the economy or helping small business. And if you're the 90% of Americans who work in this country who aren't business owners or running a business than talking about what we can do to help businesses and how we can, grow the economy overall. You're looking there saying, where am I in this picture? I mean, in a sense, what you do every time you get up and you lay out your vision is you paint a picture. You paint a picture of, okay, here's what America's going to look like. And I use the example of the 2012 convention. The night I spoke, that we had an hour of speakers right before I came out to speak who were poking at Barack Obama for the comment he made that, business people didn't build their own business. Remember that? And so that night we had all these signs. We built that, and so we had a slew of small businessmen go out there one after another talking about how they built their business. That's great. We've now talked to 7% of the population of the country. So you're painting this picture, and people aren't seeing who you're. We didn't send a single worker out there, and that's the problem with the Republican Party. Yes, we're the party of small business, but if that's all we are, we're never going to win an election. I mean, there's less than 10% of the public are small business people. We're going to win because workers think that we're on their side too, that we want better wages, better benefits, better opportunity to succeed. And we don't do that. We don't ever talk about it. Because if we do, then you're trying to manage the economy. I would say that, having policies that allow us to be competitive with the rest of the world so we can create jobs that are going to employ people who are at the middle or bottom end of the skills skills paradigm is not managing the economy. It's creating a robust and healthy country, right? That if we continue to see the hollowing out of the middle of this country, that's going to be a problem. So yeah, I feel like we separate ourselves out from the rest of the field in that regard as a communicator, and a communicator that connects. And if we can do that, unlike these other candidates who didn't do that, I think we have an excellent chance of winning this election.
Shifting gears, you saw what happened at the fatal shooting at the movie theater in Louisiana. What role, if any, does the federal government have to try to combat gun violence?
Well, we have the background checks in place, and I've always supported background checks. And if you're specifically, I know people are always worried about, where do these guns come from? Well, we have background checks in place. Really, when I was in the United States Senate, I supported prosecution of gun crimes. In other words, if people are caught in the commission of a crime with a gun that's been illegally acquired, we need to do prosecutions on that and hand out very, very heavy sentences on that. We shouldn't plead those down. We should be as tough on gun crimes as we are on drunk drivers in America. And so there are things we can do from that enforcement side, but ultimately, this is a question that goes beyond the inanimate object. It goes to a society that per capita probably has less guns now than it did 150 years ago, but has a heck of a lot more violence than it did 150 years ago. And so it's hard to blame the guns. How about, and this is something that goes in really with my economic policy, which is if we don't have strong families that are nurturing and raising young men and women in a positive way that provides good values, importance of education, the importance of work, all of the things that we know that you need to do to be a successful citizen of this country. If that's not happening at the grassroots level, at the foundational level of the family, then you can have all the gun laws you want, and you're not going to solve this problem. And as we've seen, because if you go to the neighborhoods where the gun crimes are the highest, you're going to find the neighborhood where the dad ratio is the lowest. And it started out with the divorce culture, and then it became the out-of-wedlock birth culture, and now we have, through court decisions and others, a complete decoupling of the concept of marriage to the concept of having and raising children. Now marriage has, in a sense, nothing to do with it. Marriage is simply about adults. So we've sort of come full circle to where marriage was once the place that was held up and honored and given a cherished place in society because of its role in bringing men and women together in stable relationships, which is good for both men and women, providing that solid foundation for the community and the stable place to have and raise children. We've now gone full circle away from that. That marriage is simply about romantic relationship between two people that is temporary, not permanent in nature, and maybe not even solemnized in a marriage, but can be cohabitating. That's equally acceptable. All these things are acceptable. There's no norm. There's no preferred. Everything is okay. But when everything is okay, asking people to be responsible, to make lifetime commitments to personal responsibility of giving them themselves toward the other person, and then giving even more to the people that they're having. If everything's the same, if it's all the same, why are we then what possible reason are people going to want to do this really hard thing called marriage if all these other things are just as well approved and accepted by society? And that's what's happening. You're seeing the out-of-wedlock birth rate over the last 40 years go from what Daniel Patrick Moynihan called a crisis level back in the 1960s when they were in the 20% in the black community, now to 75% in the black community, over 50% in the Hispanic community, and about 30% in the white community. And an increasing number of these homes in which children are being born out of wedlock. You're finding, and this is a recent phenomenon, and I think tied to this this movement of decoupling marriage from children formally, as what these court decisions have done, is that you're now finding a majority of children born in America out of wedlock are born with the father of the child living in the home. And so we have now officially said to dads, you don't have to get married to have children. And because children have nothing to do with marriage, so why get married? And inherently those are unstable relationships which end in usually no marriage.
So what would a President Santorum do to decrease the divorce rate, increase?
I actually wrote about this back. You may recall Hillary Clinton wrote a book a few years ago called "It Takes a Village." I wrote a book called "It Takes a Family," and I talk a lot about this in that book. Highlight organizations that have actually been successful in doing stuff about it. One of them, interestingly enough, is in Chattanooga. A group called First Things First, which is now spread in other cities around the country. I'd like to think in part because we highlighted them and had them in for congressional hearings and really lifted them up as sort of a model group. They use no government dollars. They bring the community together, educators, churches, civic groups, businesses, government, and they all sort of signed on together. They came under the auspices of this group and decided that we were going to actually encourage and support the institution of marriage. We were going to try to help married people have stronger, stable, and more stable relationships. We were going to try to reduce the divorce rate. We're going to try to reduce the out-of-wedlock birth rate. We're going to actually have curriculum in the classroom. It's really interesting that today the left insists that we have textbooks in our classrooms in as early as first grade. I've got it. I'm sorry. I'm trying to reach down on occasion. As early as first grade, we have textbooks that Johnny has two mommies or Susie has two dads. But if you put a textbook in there that says the importance of traditional marriage and mothers and fathers and raising children and how that's important and why you should orient your life toward that, you're moralizing. You can't do that because that's trying to impose your values on us. But it's okay to put mommy, Susie has two moms. It's insanity.
But as president, would you do something specific? Would you say, okay, administrative order, we're going to ban all of those textbooks?
What I would say is that we as a society have the power within us if we focus our attention on it to do what they did in Chattanooga, which is not pass a single law that I'm aware of, but get the community. The president has probably had his most successful, other than Obamacare, which he shoved down the throat of the American public. The other thing he shoved down the throat of the American public without passing a law, and that was global warming, climate change. He's been successful at getting huge changes in our society, all based around the concept of reducing CO2 emissions, without passing a single law. Why? Because he talks about it all the time. And he talks to businesses about it, he talks to churches about it, he talks to schools about it. Now imagine a president, instead of focusing on something that is going to actually reduce the economic vitality of our country, cause more problem for our children to be able to rise in society, get rid of the jobs that are the most important jobs for lower and middle income people, which are manufacturing and energy related jobs. Imagine now if you had a president of the United States who was actually going to increase those jobs, number one, and number two, through policy. But number two, go out and talk to Hollywood, our educators, and by the way, have support from the left. I mean, I don't think I didn't bring my briefcase on this trip because it was a short trip, but I usually have it with me in my briefcase. A book by a guy named Robert Putnam, who just wrote a book recently called Our Kids. Have any of you read it?
He lives right here.
He lives here?
He's a New Hampshire guy.
Well, I'm a big Robert Putnam fan. I go back, even though he's a liberal Democrat, and he's probably not a fan of mine, which is fine. I don't, just because I'm a fan of him doesn't mean he has to be a fan of mine. But in my first book that I wrote, It Takes a Family, a lot of what I wrote about came from his book Bowling Alone, which I thought was a really great seminal work, and how our society has broken down, our ties that bind have broken down. And I think he's written a very important role. Did you read it?
Oh, yeah.
It's devastating. I mean, you read it, it just breaks your heart. And you just read these stories of children growing up in America today and the situations they're running. And I know, you may have heard of some of these, but to read the gritty details of them, and these are real kids, just breaks your heart. And he writes now. He focuses a lot on a lot of things. But at the core of what Putnam writes about, and I think he'll admit this, is that the breakdown of the American family is really the reason for the big lack of opportunity and the lack of people to be able to rise in society. And I also talk about Charles Murray, if you read his book, Coming Apart. And here's a libertarian who says the same thing. So when you say, well, boy, you go out there as president, you start talking about things, you're going to start controversy. The Center for American Progress, in a USA Today story right after the Putnam book came out, actually said that we're going to have to start talking about the F word, and that's family. You can't ignore it. You can say all you want to help people. If you ignore the elephant in the room here or the donkey in the room here, then you're not going to solve a problem. And I think we might have an opportunity with this next president, and bringing out left, right, libertarian, liberal thinkers, and say, look, here's the evidence, ladies and gentlemen. I think whether it's in the Putnam book or an interview, he said it's more important for a parent to read to his or her child in the first 4 years of their life than it is to pay for 4 years of college. If you want to add to their success in a substantial way, we just need to get. Sometimes it's just what you focus on, what you talk about, what's out there, what you see, what becomes part of the culture, and we've let family and marriage drop out of the culture, and no surprise, we're getting less of it. I think we need to bring it back to the middle of the culture, and I can guarantee you there are many really good people on the left who are in the popular culture today who are not providing the most shining and great example, that if you lay out, as I think we would, the devastation that this is occurring, not to their kids, because they've got the money to get through all the problems that come from broken homes and lack of fathers, but to the poor in our society and the ability for them to rise. I think one of the stats I saw is that if you come from a single-parent home in a neighborhood of single-parent homes and go to a single-parent home school, the chances of you ever reaching the top 20% of income earners in America is 3%. That's just, we can't. How can we say that we're a country that allows for people to rise if we don't?
Let's talk about gay marriage. So if you look at the public opinion polls, you look at the Supreme Court decision, do you think it's a settled topic in America?
When the law is unjust, it's never a settled topic. When the truth is not reflected in the law, it can never be settled. And that's the same way Roe versus Wade can never be settled. The only way Roe versus Wade will be settled is that the respect for the dignity of all human life is restored, period. Anything short of that, you will see agitation. Just like we saw when there were certain people in this country who weren't treated and given the dignity of being a citizen and with all rights attached to them. It was never settled until that was changed, and that's look, societies, courts get things wrong every now and then. Yeah, unlike many, I believe man has fallen, and there's, we're gonna take some bad turns. The important thing is to keep striving for what we know is best, and keep encouraging the better angels of our nature instead of our most base desires.
We have a whole bunch of people who have. I mean, we've got more than a dozen questions here, and these are voters from New Hampshire. So
Good.
I would
Hello,
love
voters
to,
from New Hampshire. How are you?
I'd love to just answer as many of these as possible. So maybe if we just do,
Yeah, I'll look into
kind
the
of a
camera and
lightning
try to
round.
answer them directly. How's that?
Let's talk about NASA funding, up, down, or sideways.
I'm going to be honest about that one. That's one that I'd have to. I've not really done my homework on in the last 4 years. I really have to take a look at whether I would, what I would do with the NASA program. To me, it's a program that sort of was out there without really any real clear vision and leadership. And so I guess my gut would be, I would do it's been an important program for America for a long time. Exploration and space is still important to this country. But I feel like I'd have to understand better what the mission is and whether it's a mission that can and should be accomplished for the resources we're putting in it. But for now, I'm not too sure I can give the answer to that.
Climate change. Do you believe in it? And if so, what would you do?
I find it interesting that it's a matter of belief, right? Science should not be a matter of belief. Science should be a matter of data and looking at things. I get a kick out of a lot of these folks who are pushing for, the debate is over, it is what it is, and yet if you ask them if the child in the womb is a human being, they'll say no. And that's been a scientific fact that's been known for certainly anybody's lifetime here on Earth today. That's a scientific fact. It is a human being. Yet those who deny that want us to accept something that is predicated on computer models, not on actual evidence. I would say that clearly the Earth warmed in the latter part of the 20th century and has remained warmer than it has been. The Earth has been a lot warmer. The Earth has been a lot cooler. That somehow I know that the temperatures in the 1980s and 90s were the optimal temperature for the world, and that any warming or cooling is a bad thing, to me just ignores the reality that the Earth warms and cools on a continual basis, and it's caused by many factors. The idea that one singular factor is the thing that's driving it, to me, is suspicious, number one. And number two, I say this, let's accept the fact that there is warming, and clearly I admit it has warmed. Let's accept the fact, by the way, that all the projections of how much it would warm from 1998 on have not occurred. So if you're getting short-term things wrong, what's your chances that you're going to get long-term things right? All right. So I would say that if you accept all of this, accept the warming, accept that man has a role, and even a substantial role to play in it. What's the role of the United States here? If you look at President Obama's goal, which was, I think, to reduce emissions overall by 80%, I think, by the 2015. According to his own EPA, if you reduce the emissions of the United States of America by 80%, and the cataclysmic effect on American workers, particularly lower income workers, of that is almost hard to describe how devastating it would be economically for that to happen. But let's assume we can do it. What would be the effect on global temperatures? Anybody know? 0.1 degree. 0.1 degree, which, according to the own EPA, is a natural variant. So, okay, all of this is true. The United States bends over backward to accommodate this, and what's the result? No effect, none. So why are we doing this? Here's what I would say. Here's what I propose. I don't know if this is true. Would actually have a bigger impact that if the United States actually grew their carbon footprint. Now, that doesn't mean, when I say grow it, I don't mean in real terms, but grow it in this respect. By actually moving manufacturing from countries like China and India and other third world nations, where it's occurring right now, where there's little to no environmental control, where CO2 emissions are substantially higher per unit produced than they are here in the United States. So if you're really concerned about climate change, I would make the argument you would want the United States of America to be the largest manufacturer in the world. You would want almost all manufacturing done in countries where there is great environmental protections and controls. So I'm going to do the climate alarmists a favor. I'm going to bring all of those dirty, polluting plants from all over the country, all over the world, and try to move them back to the United States so they can produce a whole lot less CO2.
What do you think about the number of people in prison? Do you think we're okay? Do you think we need a decrease? And if so, how do we decrease?
I've actually been open to the idea, and in fact supported some ideas about looking at some of our federal statutes with respect to nonviolent crimes and reducing some of the prison time in those. I know we have mandatory minimums of some of it. So I guess legal reform in the sense of judicial reform as far as sentencing, some of the kind, and I even voted for some of these way back in the 90s. I think we have to look at the size of our prison population and some of the experiments have been done at the state level where we've seen a change in sentencing for some of these drug-related crimes in particular, and look at is there a better way to deal with this issue other than long terms of incarceration.
And I have I'm going to ask 4. These are really quick hit ones. Where are your grandparents, or what's your family background?
Yeah, my dad was born in Italy. A little immigration story here because we talked about immigration. My dad came over to this country in 1930, but my grandfather came here in 1923. It was really interesting because he came after the 1921 Immigration Act, which was an act that pretty much shut down immigration in America. We were bringing in about 750,000 people a year into this country, and in 21 they cut it back. They put another act in called the 1924 Act, which tweaked it some more, but we went down to about 165,000. But the 21 Act was targeted at Italians and Jews because we had very, very high levels of Italians and Jews coming into this country, and there were economic reasons for doing it because of the post-war recession, post-World War I recession. So it was driven by economics, and that's why it got very broad bipartisan support. But there was an element of the act which was clearly xenophobic against Jews and Italians. Well, my family's Italian, and yet my grandfather, even though they put limits, was able to get in. And I was asked, it was really sort of a fun story. I was asked by one of these groups because my position on immigration is pretty strong, and they made the claim that my grandfather was illegal, because there's no way as an Italian he would have been able to get in 1923 because they had shut down to a very, very small number, and it would have been unlikely that he would have gotten in. So that put me into a panic. Now, interestingly enough, I knew my grandfather became a citizen in 1930, 7 years later, which was sort of the norm, and brought the rest of the family in. And so it would be hard for me to conceive that he was illegal, but I didn't know. So I had to do some digging around, went through my dad who had passed away, his old files, and actually found my grandfather's immigration papers. And the reason he was able to come in is because when my grandfather and my father was born in Italy in the region called Trentino Alto Adige, which is way up in the northeastern part, up near the Austrian border. And when my grandfather was born in 1888, that part of Italy was part of Austria. And so my grandfather had an Austrian passport. My dad, when he was born in 1923, was born in Italy because it was part of Italy then. And so he couldn't come in. But my grandfather could because he was Austrian. So it's a long way of saying that my parents, my dad came over here, he was from Italy, came when he was 7. And my mom's family is, her mom's side is Irish, her dad's side is Italian, both first generation on that side. And so I'm Irish and Italian.
This person would like to know who the best senator that you've ever worked with is, and we should check to make sure this isn't Lindsey Graham asking the question.
The guy that I respected the most as just a really strong, great senator was Phil Graham. I think Phil was, a senator. He knew his stuff, he knew the rules, had the courage to go out and fight, and had the wisdom to know when not to.
And here's one I'll let sneak in, but this person would like to know if you become president, would you hire Donald Trump?
I think Donald is is probably not going to be looking for any kind of government job other than the one he's running for.
Great. You guys have anything else?
You had mentioned this week in the Boston Herald where you had said just because you have money doesn't mean you're going to be successful. What do you, explain that a little bit, and was it aimed at anyone in particular?
Well, it's interesting. I saw an interview. I was on an airport. Spent a lot of time in airports, so I see a lot of things in airports. Of Warren Buffett, and he was asked by a group of kids. This was on a CNN show. He was asked by a group of kids, you know, how would you define success? I think was the question. And he talked about his success and money and all these things he'd done. He said, but I've learned that in my life, a painful lesson that I understand that success is being loved by the people that you care most about. That is success. And so you look at it from Warren Buffett's point of view. Success can be measured in so many ways. My children's success, I mean, I talk about it in a book I wrote recently about my daughter. You know, we lost a little boy a few hours after he was born. Tough. And makes you think about a lot of things. And then having this other daughter who was also very severely disabled, was supposed to die, wasn't supposed to live but a few days. One of the things that really comes home to you, that in the end, all that matters is the end. In the end, all that matters is where, you know, are your kids going to heaven or aren't they? And the job that I have is the most important thing. Is a success for me is that someday, you know, my kids and hopefully their kids will be with the Lord someday. That to me is the greatest measure of success that I can have.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Sure.